Okay, so keeping in the theme of boxing, I'd like to talk a little bit about, excuse me, um, who were the greatest British fighters of all time. Now, this is obviously one of those lists that can be debated all night long, and that's what makes it so fun, makes it so interesting. Um, I'm trying to be quite scientific in this debate and looking into lots of different factors. So when I go through my list, I'll try and explain why. In fact, I should say this isn't strictly a list. I'm going to name my top 5, and then after that just names that I think should be in the top 30. Although, because after 5 I genuinely find it difficult. I might go up to 8 in fact. I think I could probably pull that off, but after, let's say, 8, I find it very difficult to, because you get so many good fighters out there. Britain, of course, was the birthplace of modern boxing, so this country has a very rich tradition in this sport. There are some names I'm not going to include. Bob Fitzsimmons, simply because, although he was from Cornwall, he had his entire career in the United States, so I'm not counting him for that reason. Barry McGuigan I am counting, because although he's from the Republic of Ireland, he got British citizenship, just in case anyone wonders about that. In order to prepare this, I was looking at a list of British world champions earlier, and there's a lot of names there I haven't actually heard of. And that made me think, well, whilst nothing should be taken away from these guys' achievements, being a world champion isn't necessarily an automatic gateway to being regarded as a great boxer, because it's all to do with who exactly you fight. And again, it's not taking anything away from their achievements, but you get guys that would be considered great that never actually won a world title. So without further ado, and by the way, just to give you an idea of who I'm talking about with that, you get guys like Charlie McGree, Maurice Hope, John Stracey, Walter McGowan, Johnny Caldwell, Rinty Monaghan, Matt Wells. These are all British guys who won some level of a world title. Paul Hodgkinson, Pat Clinton, Colin McMillan, Paul Weir, Chris Pyatt, Eamon Loughran, Robbie Reagan. Now a lot of those guys, Paul Ingle, Glenn Catley, a lot of those guys are hardly household names, but they were world champions, so not to take anything away from them. But I just think it is interesting, and I wonder what the reason for that is. Why are they not household names in the way that other fighters are? So without further ado, this is my list, and I'm going to give a little bit of an explanation for each one. Number 1 is the only one for me that is relatively easy, and for that I put Jimmy Wilde. He is often in the top of all-time British boxing lists. He's considered by many the greatest flyweight ever, including Nat Fletcher. He was undefeated in his first 90 fights, which is phenomenal. He was one of the hardest hitters in boxing history, which again is incredible for a man of his size. It's the equivalent of an ant lifting a leaf above its head. So for all those reasons, I put Jimmy Wilde number 1. He really was a phenomenon, and it's unfortunate that he isn't better remembered today. Like I've said before, Wales, as far as I know, whilst it's a country that's known for remembering its boxing greats, Jimmy Wilde doesn't even have his own statue, whilst other fighters do. So Jimmy Wilde is my number 1 spot. Ted Kid Lewis, number 2. He was a Jewish fighter from London's East End. He was known as the Aldgate Sphinx. And he was fighting at a time between the First World War and the 20s when anti-Semitism was starting to be on the rise. So he was sort of one of these great Jewish fighters who definitely flew in the face of Nazi supremacist ideology. One interesting story about Kid Lewis is he was actually a bodyguard for Oswald Mosley, ironically, but he left the black shirts when he realised what their true ideology was. He was one of the British fighters to go to the States, to really make a pioneering move with that, and one thing that for me really stands out about Kid Lewis is he probably had more fights than any other British fighter. 299 bouts, 232 wins by some accounts. I should say we need to be a little cautious with fighters before 1920 because the records are a bit shady, but Ted Kid Lewis, truly a phenomenal fighter. Number 3, Joe Calzaghe. I regard Calzaghe as the best fighter of modern times, best British fighter of modern times. His record speaks for itself, 46-0. One of the very few fighters in any weight division to retire undefeated. You can argue until you're blue in the face about the Jones and Hopkins fight, but even if you don't give him credit for that, he beat greats. He beat Chris Eubank, he beat Mikhail Kessler, he beat Jeff Lacey, who was being regarded as the next Mike Tyson. In the end of the day, in a boxing match, a record is a record. Calzaghe was undefeated. So in that sense, he was Britain's Rocky Marciano. Joe Calzaghe, number 3. Number 4, and this is only a recent change I made. Ken Buchanan. 69 fights, 63 wins, an incredible record. Arguably Britain's greatest lightweight ever. Almost unquestionably Scotland's greatest fighter ever. Very tough man. This is a man who went toe-to-toe with Roberto Duran. So, with all those things into account, I put Ken Buchanan number 4. Lennox Lewis number 5. Now, the only reason I don't put Lewis at number 4 is simply because Buchanan had more fights than him, and that wasn't an easy choice. I rank Lewis very highly. I think Lewis is Britain's greatest heavyweight ever. He beat Mike Tyson. Again, okay, Tyson may have been past his peak, but I still think Lewis possessed incredible skills as a fighter. And the only 2 losses he suffered, he avenged. So in that sense, he was undefeated. He lost to Oliver McCall and Hazim Rahman, but he avenged both losses. So that's an incredible achievement, and not every fighter can do that. So Lennox Lewis, number 5. Number 6, and this was very tough, but number 6, I'm going to have Jack Kid Berg, another fighter from the past. He beat greats like Kid Chocolate, Mushy Callahan, Tony Canzoneri. Canzoneri beat him as well, but it was controversial circumstances because Berg argued about what weight division he was in. Jack Kid Berg, number 6. Number 7, Randy Turpin. One of the few men to have beat Sugar Ray Robinson, widely considered the greatest fighter of all time. Now, if it wasn't for the fact that Robinson wasn't at his best at that point, then I would probably have Randy Turpin as the greatest British fighter. I mean, to beat the greatest, you have to be pretty damn good. Like I say, the peak factor I think is over-argued, but that's the reason I don't have Randy Turpin higher. But I think he was an incredibly skilled fighter. After this, it gets very hard for me. At a push, maybe Prince Naseem, number 8. At a push, but I honestly find it very difficult after this. So instead of going number by number, I'm just going to name some guys that I think should be in the top 20 to 30, let's say. Chris Eubank. In fact, Chris Eubank could very well be number 8 as well. Chris Eubank, Nigel Benn, Jim Driscoll, Benny Lynch, Howard Winston, Jock McAvoy, Freddie Mills, Bruce Woodcock. The reason I have Mills above Woodcock, if anyone's wondering, because Woodcock beat Mills, is simply because Mills had a lot more fights. Joe Bugner. I think he was a very good contender. A few people might raise eyebrows at that, but Bugner went toe-to-toe with the biggest names of his day. I think that alone should put him quite highly ranked. Henry Cooper, Len Harvey, Owen Moran, Peter Keane, Tommy Farr, Terry Downs, Terry Marsh, Jim Watt, Rinty Monaghan, Herbie Hyde. All those guys I would put somewhere in the top 30. Now, I haven't included active fighters if I didn't already mention that, such as, did I mention Frank Bruno? I put him in my top 20 list. Certainly one of the bravest fighters ever, but not among the best heavyweights. One of the most popular, but I don't. Oh, that reminds me of, did I put Ricky Hatton in there? He should definitely be in the top, probably 15. Barry McGuigan, again, he may have been from the Republic of Ireland, but he got British citizenship. Don Cockell, even though he didn't get a title, he was a very good contender. Dick Richardson, Eddie Thomas. So those are all guys that probably deserve some place in the top 30, or at least the top 50. There was a guy, by the way, between 1896 and 1900, Peddler Palmer, unusual name. He's very frequently cited on the box rec records for London. He was a fighter from Canning Town. He held the world bantamweight title from 1896 to 1900. He ended up 5 years in jail for manslaughter after killing a man on a train. He's one of those fighters from way back whose record is quite difficult to verify. There was other celebrated fighters at that time, people like Seaman Tommy Watson and Bombardier Billy Wells. By the way, it was Bombardier Billy Wells who acted as one of the first Arthur Rank gongmen, the famous film company Arthur Rank. I believe Bombardier Billy Wells was one of the first fighters to actually act as the model for hitting the gong. So those are all guys that I think should be somewhere in the top 30, and a lot of them aren't really remembered that well. I haven't included active fighters like Carl Froch, Amir Khan, Ricky Burns, and I do think those guys are going to rank quite highly in future lists. How highly I don't know, but I just think it's a mistake. I think George Groves has a lot of potential, and Anthony Joshua. But I'm very reluctant to rank active fighters. In the same way, you wouldn't, if you have a list of greatest presidents or greatest prime ministers, you wouldn't rank the incumbent. So for the same reason, I'm not ranking those guys. Johnny Nelson possibly should be someone in the top 30, possibly. But you know, this is not an exact science. Let me know your own thoughts. Freddie Welsh, by the way, again, I was reluctant to put him on my list simply because most of his fights were not in Britain, but he was definitely a very skilled fighter. Just looking at that list of world champions, maybe Jackie Peterson. Yeah, like I say, you know, there's so many guys that had big achievements in the ring but can't necessarily be considered greats. That's not to take anything away from them, but this is not an exact science, and of course it's very subjective, and objective for that matter, if you're trying to be objective. So let me know your own thoughts. I find too many lists actually ignore old time fighters, so that's why I've tried to include some of the guys from the old days as well, to try and make this as fair as possible. I've seen some ridiculous lists though that include bare knuckle fighters. I think it was a Bleacher Report, included Jack Broughton. Now, it's not that Jack Broughton was a bad fighter, he absolutely wasn't, he was a great fighter, but he was a bare knuckle fighter. So it's clearly ridiculous putting him in that list. So I've tried to be scientific in this. Let me know if you agree with my top 5 results. Once again, Jimmy Wilde, Ted Kid Lewis, Joe Calzaghe, Ken Buchanan, Lennox Lewis. That's my top 5. Who would you have as your top 5 if you're a British boxing fan? Is there any guys you think I should be including in there that I didn't mention? Both Londons, Brian London, Jack London, do they deserve to be in there? There's a lot of factors to consider. I guess David Hay is semi-retired, so he'd probably be in the top 10 heavyweights, but certainly not on level with Lennox Lewis. So that's just my opinion, and in the end of the day, this is just opinion. I'll leave it there because I don't want to run out of time. Let me know your thoughts.